Stecker. I think most people here know that. And I am honored to have the opportunity to introduce our speaker. I also just want to express my gratitude for the ongoing leadership of our President, Rachel Gagula, who is here with us this morning. I want to thank Lee Harunian, who has been the head of the Israel Affairs Committee and who does more on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people than just about anybody that I know. So Lee. I want to thank Bobby Bakshi for his leadership of the Israel Affairs Committee and for bringing his own energy to an incredibly important enterprise that is getting more important by the day. And I also wanted to thank Abe Canfer, who reached out and was able to find and encourage our speaker to come and to speak with us this morning. So thank you, Abe. So I am going to do something which is, I guess, slightly unconventional. I'm going to introduce the speaker. I'm going to hear the first part of his presentation, and then I'm going to have to excuse myself. And my excuse is that I'm going to be going to Kennedy Airport, where I'll be joining a group of over 30 rabbis on a solidarity mission to Israel. So as I said to a few people who are asking, I'm not bringing military expertise. I have political opinions, but I'm not going there because the Israeli government is looking right now to hear my political opinions. I'm going with my colleagues to bring love and support and prayer, and basically to bring the love of this community and the American Jewish community to our brothers and sisters in Israel. I also, before introducing the speaker, just want to let people know, because there is a lot of anxiety about what's going on college campuses, university campuses. And so we reached out to the children within our congregational community who are on college campuses as undergraduates or as graduate students. And I offered them, of course, the opportunity to reach out to me and to speak with me at any point, because many of them are genuinely scared to be themselves as Jews on college campuses, which is something which is frightening and extraordinary. And also offered them the opportunity, and he was gracious enough to offer the opportunity to have a Zoom with me and with Jonathan Greenblatt, who is the head of the ADL, to hear them out, to hear about what they're experiencing, and for Jonathan especially to be able to offer background and resources, because obviously the battle that's taking place has multiple fronts. And sadly, university campuses are among the fronts in which this battle is taking place. So now our speaker, brief introduction. So we are really delighted to have Israel Nitzan with us, former acting consul general in New York. And he spent the last 22 years working as a diplomat for Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He served here in New York. He also served in Egypt. He served at the UN. And he, reflecting back on his experiences serving with the community of New York, observed how many similarities there are between Israelis and New Yorkers. Most of them are positive. Israelis, as we know, are highly accomplished and blunt, as are New Yorkers. And he, using his own diplomatic gifts, was able truly to represent the diversity of Israel to the diversity of the New York community. He has a background in Middle Eastern affairs. And one of the main things that we want to do, in addition to raising money, and you have these flyers, so use the QR code to please donate to our emergency campaign. In addition to that, and in addition to giving what we can to support Israelis, we also want to raise and deepen our awareness about what is going on, not just what's happening now, but the background to this conflict, because to the extent that we have deep knowledge, we can directly influence and we can represent the truth in terms of what is unfolding. So with no further introduction, my absolute delight to present Israel Nitzan.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Thank you very much, Rabbi Stecker, for this introduction and for having me here today, and of course the leadership of this community, and of course thank you so much for taking the initiative and inviting me. I should maybe open by thanking all of you for everything that you do. The fact that we have so many people here today on Sunday morning, showing your support to the state of Israel, showing your support to our family back home. It's heartwarming. I think that I'm grateful for all that you do, and I will echo the rabbi, and of course Mr. Arunian as well, by saying that you have here the QR code if you want to share also in support with this as well. You asked me to give more of to talk about the history and how this situation evolved, and how did Hamas came to power, and just putting making sure that okay, I'm not going to talk too much. So we were surprised on October 7th. We were surprised. We were surprised by Hamas's attack. We were also surprised by the sophistication of the attack, but also by the brutality of what happened. Now, as I said, Abe asked me to talk about the history of, I was struggling with the title on, as you can see. The original title was Gaza. The second title was no title at all, but then I decided to talk about Israel's Gaza problem. It's a problem since the biblical times. It's a problem since 1949. The Gaza Strip has actually been in the center of Israeli security concerns, posing threats and challenges since 1949. It's a chronic problem that has escalated since 1949, and I think that what happened on October 7th was the peak of this escalation of this problem. A little about the Gaza Strip. I understand that I need to press. So a little about Gaza. It's a small piece of land in the southern part of Israel, right on the shore, on the border with Egypt. Only 365 square kilometers, that is 140 square miles. 26 miles length, 4 to 8 miles wide, in which there are 2.5 million residents. This is one of the most densely populated places in the world. More than 16,000 people in 1 square mile of land. Gaza has one of the highest fertility rates in the world. In 1991, they had 8.4, the average was 8.4 children per woman. It dropped in 2013 to 4.4, but it's still very high compared to other places in the world. And of course, we're talking about very young population. In 2014, 43.5% of the population was under the age of 14. These are the people, by the way, you're talking about this age, this generation was the one responsible for the attack on October 7th. And I need to say one more thing about the population. We hear a lot about genocide. Israel is committing genocide, has committed genocide in Gaza. In 1967, we will talk also about the history, but in 1967, the census made by advanced by Israel in Gaza said that there are 394,000 residents in the Gaza Strip. Today, there are more than 2.5 million. So all the arguments, all the claims about a genocide performed in Gaza, I think that numbers don't lie. I put here two slides. One of the slides is the 1947 partition plan of the UN. Gaza was part of what is part of the territory that was designated for the Arab states, and the other again, the UN divided basically the land between two different areas. One was designated for the Jewish state, the other one was designated for the Arab state. Gaza was part of the Arab territory over there. At the end of the war, and this is the other slide that you see, the other map that you see, Egypt was basically moving into the territory, but managed eventually. The war ended when Egypt is under the control of the Gaza Strip, and the rest of the land was taken by Israel. This is just to make sure that you see. This is basically the Gaza Strip controlled by Egypt in 1949, following the war in 1948. During the war, tens of thousands of refugees, Palestinian refugees, took refuge in Gaza. Today, according to some assessments, the population in Gaza actually multiplied, the number multiplied by 2 in 1949. So we can talk about let's say 100,000, up to 100,000 refugees who found refuge in the Gaza Strip. Today, there are 1.7 million residents in Gaza who are still registered. Out of the 2.5, 1.7 are still registered as refugees by the United Nations. Israel, a couple of days ago, was criticized for attacking the civilian neighborhood of Jabalia, and was criticized for attacking a refugee camp. I think that we all know that this is not a refugee camp. This is basically a neighborhood in Gaza in which you have many people who are originally from families of refugees in 1949. It's still called a refugee camp that is still run by the UN. Egypt had the Gaza Strip under military control and under military rule for 2 decades, but allowed the residents to work and study in Egypt. The 1950s saw the beginning of attacks from the Gaza Strip against Israeli communities with terrorists. Back then they were called the Fadayun. I'm sure you heard about them, attacking the Jewish communities, encouraged and supported and financed and sponsored by the Egyptian government. These attacks eventually deteriorated, the continued attacks and the deterioration in our security situation with Egypt eventually led to the 1956 war, the Sinai campaign, that basically ended this problem, the security problem of terrorism from the Gaza Strip. Now, this takes us to 1967. In 1967, of course, Israel captures also the Gaza Strip, including Sinai and the rest of the territories. In a consensus again made by Israel, in a census made by Israel in the Gaza Strip, the government found out that there are 393,000 refugees from 1948 in the Gaza Strip. I'm sorry, 393 residents, 2/3 out of them are refugees from 1948. But still, again, Gaza has posed a security problem to Israel, and actually immediately after the war, terrorist attacks starting within the Gaza Strip, with attacks against Israelis who visited the Gaza Strip early in the 1970s. Now, at the same time, Israel also started establishing settlements in the Gaza Strip. It started in 1968, a year after the war, when Yigal Allon initiated the establishment of 2 settlements. Actually, his goal was to put 2 settlements in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, right on the border with Sinai, and basically cutting the Gaza Strip from Egypt. Later on, the government established 15 more, altogether 17 settlements in the Gaza Strip. Most of them were in the south, again, with an understanding that they should block any attempt by Egypt to retake the Gaza Strip, leading altogether to about 8,000 residents in these Israelis living in Gaza in these 17 settlements by the year of 2005. Our next stop in this historic journey that is basically going to lead to nowhere is 1978. Following Yom Kippur War, Israel signs a peace. Sadat in 1977 decided to took the initiative and visited Israel. It led to a peace process between Israel and Egypt. In 1978, Israel and Egypt signs the Camp David Accords that has basically 2 parts. One part is the peace agreement with basically an agreement or a first stage to signing a peace agreement between Israel and Egypt, signed in 1979. The second part was a discussion about Palestinian autonomy. Why is it important? Because this is actually the first time that Egypt basically gained back in these negotiations, gained back Sinai, but left Gaza out of its borders. Now officially, Gaza is no longer part of Egypt, and Gaza is part of a solution to the Palestinian issue. Again, as part of the negotiations between Israel and Egypt, should be also discussed as part of discussions on a self-governance and autonomy for the Palestinians. The next stop is 1987. The Intifada, the Palestinian uprising against Israel, broke out in December 1987. After months of terror attacks and tension, daily clashes between Palestinians and the IDF. The Palestinian leadership, the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, led by Yasser Arafat, were not part of the initial, let's say, they were not part of the initiative for this uprising. It was a popular uprising, but they were trying to ride on this tiger and basically take the lead. The Intifada is important because it also started in Gaza. Like many of our problems, many of our security problems related to this situation, it started in Gaza with following a car accident. An Israeli truck driver accidentally hit 2 cars, killing 4 Palestinians. This was the trigger for this violence. It started in Gaza and eventually spilled over the West Bank. In December 1987 was also the month when Hamas was born. Hamas is the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, created out of an Islamic charity, what is called Dawah in Arabic, and turned into a violent terrorist organization, basically moving from charity to terrorism, moving from Dawah in Islam to jihad. Sheikh Ahmad Yassin, you can see in the picture downstairs, was the founder of Hamas. He was born southern to Ashkelon. He was actually spent most of his life in the Gaza Strip. Hamas is the acronym of the Islamic Resistance Movement in Arabic. Their charter is anti-Semitic and calls for the destruction of the state of Israel and murder of all Jews. Hamas has basically challenged the leadership of the so-called secular leadership of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, and Yasser Arafat, especially when in the background, again, going back to 1978, there are some talks about autonomy to the Palestinians, self-governance, and some kind of a political solution. Their solution, Hamas' solution, was very clear: violence and the liberation of Palestine and the destruction of the state of Israel. Now, Israel in that period perceived Hamas as a challenge, but Hamas was also perceived by Israel as a factor that can actually contribute to the weakening of the PLO in the challenging days of the Intifada. So Israel did not fight Hamas decisively. The Intifada lasted for 6 years, and then in 1993, the Intifada ended with the beginning of the Oslo process and the signing of the Oslo Accords. Just moving down the slide. Now, the Oslo Accords, I think that we all know, was the first time that Israel recognized the PLO as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, although it did not explicitly endorse this two-state solution. It did create a framework for self-governance for Palestinians in their cities and their communities. Now, the first implementation of this principle of self-governance by the PLO was again the creation of the Palestinian Authority. It was after the signing of the 1994 Cairo agreement. The Cairo agreement was based on a very simple principle where we're going basically to put everything into a test to test the ability of the PLO to govern 2 main cities, 2 main areas: Gaza first, including Jericho in the West Bank. Eventually, I put here the 1995 interim agreement. The Cairo agreement was included and incorporated in the interim agreement of 1995. So basically what happened in Gaza is that Israel handed 84% of the territory to the Palestinian Authority. As you can see in the map, everything that is brown is Area A, which is under full control, both civilian and security of the Palestinian Authority, and Area C, basically the Israeli settlements, was under the full control of Israel. Arafat, for the first time, returned as the head of the Palestinian Authority, as the leader, the person who actually governs the Palestinian territory for the first time in history. The first step was taken was actually, he went back to Palestine through Gaza. Gaza, again, is the first territory governed by Palestinians. At the same time, Hamas is pushing very aggressively against the PLO with a series of during the negotiations between Israel and the PLO, during the Oslo process, Hamas launched a wave of suicide attacks when Israel found itself eventually negotiating with the PLO while fighting Hamas terrorism. Eventually, these negotiations led to nowhere, as you know, with different Israeli governments, both Rabin, Peres, Netanyahu, and Barak. It basically led to nowhere, and in September 2001, the second Intifada breaks out, including a much more aggressive, much more sophisticated, much more lethal series of suicide attacks led by Hamas in buses and restaurants in Israeli cities. More than 1,000 Israelis were murdered. And this is the period when, in 2001, when the Qassam rockets actually for the first time are brought into the scene. There were 450 Qassam rockets fired between 2001 and 2004, especially at Sderot, in southern Israel. This is where we basically everything stood still. There's no progress with the Palestinians. We're in the middle of the Intifada. There's no progress and no possibility for having any peace solution with Arafat. We're fighting Hamas, and the burden on the IDF in the Gaza Strip is becoming unbearable. This is where in December 2003, Sharon presents his disengagement plan from the Gaza Strip. As Sharon described it, due to the ongoing Palestinian terrorism and Arafat's policy that does not allow the achievement of peace, Israel will have to act unilaterally in coordination with the US to bring maximum security and minimum friction with the Palestinian population. The first step of this, the major step of the implementation of the disengagement plan is the disengagement from Gaza. In the summer of 2005, Israel basically removed all settlements, returned all Israelis back home, and withdrew all its troops from the Gaza Strip. No Israelis in Gaza, basically no occupation anymore in Gaza. It was perceived back then as an opportunity to allow the Palestinians to self-govern in the Gaza Strip and to make the Gaza Strip into the Middle East, the Singapore of the Middle East. Of course, this perception was wrong. Now, we should not only ask what did not happen. Of course, Gaza did not become Singapore, but we should also ask what did happen. And what did happen is that Hamas was the one taking all the credit for basically kicking Israel and the IDF out of the Gaza Strip, leading to the victory of Hamas in the Palestinian legislative elections in January 2006, only a few months later. The new Palestinian government with Ismail Haniyeh, I know you've probably heard his name in recent weeks, as the prime minister was sworn 2 months later. And of course, Hamas and the PLO cannot live together, they cannot work together, and it's not that Israel made Haniyeh's life very easy. And in the coming months saw a growing tension and the conflict between the PLO and the Fatah, which is basically Arafat was the head of the Fatah. He was head also of the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the head of the Palestinian Authority. So Fatah and Hamas had ongoing fighting in these months, leading to violent clashes in June 2007, into an official split between Gaza and the West Bank, when Hamas violently took over the Gaza Strip, killing Fatah members, and the Palestinian areas separately from now on in the West Bank ran by Abbas back then, Mahmoud Abbas from the head of the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas was responsible for governing the Gaza Strip. This was an official split that we see up till today in 2006. Two governing entities, when de facto the PA, the Palestinian authorities, was still paying all the way up to actually until today, still paying the salaries of civil servants in the Gaza Strip. What we've seen, so this is basically the situation leading all the way to today. Since 2007 until today, Hamas was focused on military buildup. First of all, building the tunnels. They used all the cements they have, investing all the cements and construction materials in building underground cities. There are three kinds of tunnels in the Gaza Strip. There were. One is tunnels to Egypt through the Rafah, under the Rafah border, which were aimed at smuggling goods and basically helped Hamas also, not only by the smuggling of goods, but actually by collecting the taxes for these illegal acts. There were attack tunnels built into Israel. They were blocked in recent years by the construction of the underground wall that Israel put along the border with Gaza. And what the IDF has to deal with today, which is called the Metro, which is basically a city, 500 kilometers of underground city, basically used to protect only the terrorists from IDF bombing in case of a ground invasion. This is actually where, according to what was published, this is where our hostages are today. In addition to the tunnel, there's a military buildup of weapons with the support of Iran. Hamas has actually started to manufacture their own weapons, their own rockets, 12,000 rockets, missiles, anti-tank missiles, drones, and many more. And as well as training, again, done by Iran, training of the Nukhba. The Nukhba is the elite commando force of Hamas. This is the commander unit who led the attack on October 7th. Everything in close coordination with Iran and Hezbollah. They had cooler relations during the Syrian civil war, but relations actually were warmed up in the last decade. And now we see a very, very close coordination between the two. Hamas is a corrupt government and corrupt regime. They use the money, aid money that was sent to support the Palestinian population and basically use it for their own benefit. Khalid Mashal's properties are assumed to be in the about $5 billion. Khalid Mashal is the leader of Hamas, who is sitting in Qatar today. Ismail Haniyeh also in Qatar, $4 billion. We're talking about billionaires. Musa Abu Marzouk in Lebanon, $3 billion. Now Israel on that period was basically fighting efforts to smuggle weapons, especially the dual materials used for the construction of tunnels, the construction and the creation of manufacturing of weapons. Israel also implemented the maritime blockade. When you hear about the blockade on Gaza, we should say that it's only maritime and it's also legal according to international law, basically to prevent smuggling from the sea. Israel was involved in several rounds of fighting when the perception was that we need to weaken Hamas, based on the understanding that the Palestinian Authority cannot fight or replace Hamas. Israel was fighting through the underground activity of Hamas, in the different rounds by actually bombing, first of all, bombing the tunnels, secondly, by putting this underground barrier to prevent the infiltration through tunnels. Israel was also putting a very sophisticated fence along the border with Gaza. Israel also run two, this is also relevant for today. Throughout this period, Israel run two humanitarian crossings, Kerem Shalom in the south and Erez in the north, that basically facilitating the entrance of goods. Everything was monitored by Israel, but basically facilitated everything that the Gaza Strip needed, that was also legal and was not aimed at creating or building its terrorist facilities. These crossings were attacked. One of the first steps taken by Hamas in their attack on October 7th was to bomb and actually destroy and slaughter the soldiers in these crossings that were responsible for providing all the humanitarian needs of the Gaza Strip. There's another crossing with Egypt, Rafah, that was closed throughout this period. And now it is actually operated in coordination with the United States, monitored by Israel in order to allow the entrance of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip these days. We had several rounds of attacks, several rounds of violence with the Gaza Strip. And I think that, people try to understand what happened, on October 7th. People try to understand what exactly happened in our policy. Was our policy right? The understanding in Israel was that Hamas has no interest in launching any attack, any real full-scale confrontation with Israel. The perception was that this situation can be contained. Hamas is an enemy. We will have rounds of violence in which we will weaken Hamas as much as we can, while letting Hamas basically as the only visible possible governing agency to run the civilian affairs in the Gaza Strip through the transfer of Qatari money. I'm sure you heard about it, as well as to allow more and more Palestinian workers into Israel. This situation was clearly unsustainable. We realized that after October 7th. When Israel was focusing its policy on managing the conflict and not solving this conflict, through management of the conflict and the perception that Hamas was deterred, and if Hamas chooses to attack Israel, it will be hit so severely that the Israeli deterrence is working. And of course, this perception, of course, collapsed on October 7th. I added here, there are different talks right now about different solutions and different scenarios for the day after. It's clear that Israel cannot live with Hamas on its border. Hamas must be removed. The mission of the IDF is to dismantle Hamas's all governing and military capabilities, and to make sure that Hamas does not pose any threat to Israeli civilians in the future. This is the goal of this is the military mission. This is the mission that the IDF received from the government. But the point here is that this is the military solution. And I think that Hamas can be removed. But the question is what happens in the day after. And I understand that some people talk about different scenarios. What I included here are things that I found online in the media, different ideas raised. I'm not sure. I cannot say that I know what exactly is being discussed right now between Israel and the Americans. But as you can see, we're talking about, again, as a possibility, a return of the Palestinian Authority. I can tell you that I worked at the UN mission in 2014, during and after Operation Pillar of Defense. There were negotiations with Israel, together with Israel, of course, between the Americans and the Jordanians, back then members of the Security Council, together with other two permanent members of the Security Council of the UN, France and the UK, on some kind of a model that would basically allow, one, the removal of Hamas, destruction of all its military capabilities, and basically rolling back in time to, if you remember the map of 1995, the interim agreement, when the Palestinian Authority controls the territory using only small arms and light weapons. Eventually, the Palestinians decided to kill this initiative because Mahmoud Abbas back then did not want to return to Gaza carried by the tanks of the IDF. I'm not sure, my very own view, I'm no longer a government official. If you're asking me, he won't agree to do that also today. There's another possible scenario I read in the media of the return of Mohammed Dakhlan. Mohammed Dakhlan is a senior official in the Palestinian Authority, but he was basically responsible for governing and running, and especially the security of the Gaza Strip. He was kicked out of Gaza in 2007. He is today Mahmoud Abbas's nemesis, but he's supported by the Emiratis. So again, possible scenario, I don't know if it's possible, that maybe Mohammed Dakhlan would be able to go back to the Gaza Strip to govern on behalf of the Palestinian Authority. Another solution, some kind of an Arab initiative. The Saudis, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis still haven't yet given up, and they're not giving up on the Abraham Accords. We believe that potentially there could be some kind of an Arab initiative to solve this problem for the day after. An international initiative, some kind of an international arrangement, including international peacekeeping. It was published, I think it was published in the New York Times last week. There are different ideas and different solutions, including, by the way, also things that you hear in Israel today of the return of Israel to the Gaza Strip and rebuilding the settlements over there. There are different ideas. The bottom line is that while defeating Hamas militarily is possible, I think we have no other choice but to defeat Hamas, remove Hamas from power, destroy its military capabilities. Everything is possible, but you cannot destroy the dream. We know that also from the fight against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. Another problem is that Hamas leadership is not in Gaza. The Hamas leadership is in Qatar. They spent some time in Turkey. They're in Lebanon, reaching them, and actually, I think that this is something that maybe Israel is planning to do eventually to reach all of them and to make sure that they're not with us anymore. We need to change the mindset, and I think that this is what we see today in Israel, to change the mindset from managing this conflict to some kind of a long-term, decisive solution, a real solution. But again, I know that there are talks about it. I don't know what is going to come out of it. There are many questions that I'm not sure we have. I'm not sure that anyone has any answers about. Is the Palestinian leadership, for example, Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority, Mohammed Dakhlan, or any other so-called moderate in the Palestinian Authority, can take this step and step in to govern the Gaza Strip following an Israeli victory? Do they have the legitimacy to do that? I'm not sure. think about the young generation. I mentioned this poll from 2014 about the younger, the 43% of the population under the age of 14. This is the younger generation in Gaza. Can the younger generation in Gaza, after years of incitement against Israel, is capable of reconciling and accepting Israel as a legitimate neighbor? We should also ask if the Israeli government is willing to take such decisions. We hear different voices within the Israeli government of actually changing the reality of managing this conflict, and what are the practical solutions that are accepted by the government of Israel today. You hear different ideas thrown out to the air. I think that this is something that the Prime Minister is already dealing with about the day after. The IDF operation is a difficult step to take, but in solution-wise, it's the easiest solution. The easiest way is to exercise power. The question is, how are we going to deal with Gaza in the day after? There are more question marks than answers in this sense. So thank you again for having me, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Harold Firth, so in terms of leadership, in addition to Hamas, we know is old and possibly with dementia at this point. Not Hamas was shut down in 2007 by Hamas. One of the prisoners Israel currently holds is Marwan Barghouti, who was convicted of murdering 5 people, serving life sentences there. Is he, I know he's still considered a popular politician among the Palestinians. Is he considered a potential leader at this point?
He's one of the names. I cannot say if he has any basis of support. He's one of the names that you can actually read about. But again, the question is whether or not they would be willing to actually go and govern Gaza after, as we call it, to be carried on the tanks of into Gaza on the tanks of the IDF.
Well, because he's currently a prisoner, and if he gets released as part of a hostage exchange, does that give him legitimacy?
This is something that I think you should ask the Palestinian population. I'm not sure I have the answer.
Gentleman in the back had a question, yes.
Yeah, I have a question. Is it true that Qatar was supplying money monthly through Ben Gurion Airport to Gaza?
Yeah, this was, yes, what is
Qatari money was going to.
the so-called, again, it's a Qatari diplomat. He was the ambassador, so-called ambassador, that was responsible for sending the money. Basically, he carried, at least part of the period was actually carrying a suitcase with cash. 3 suitcases. Okay.
And my second question is there a validity to the fact that Mossad was involved with capabilities of Hamas at the early stages to become more
I don't think so.
entrenched in their, or is that just
I doubt it. Hamas is a terrorist designated.
Israel had nothing to do with creating Hamas?
This is what people say. This is what I said also. Israel was not responsible for creating Hamas. I think that in the late 1980s, Israel perceived Hamas as a challenge to the Palestinian, was not yet such a risk and such a threat on one hand, but still a significant challenge to the PLO during the days of the Intifada. So if you want to weaken the PLO, you should just let the other side do what they do while making sure that they do not attack you. But I don't think that Israel was not involved in creating, yes.
Oh, Zed, stand, why don't you stand up again, we can answer.
So today, on the different paper was announced after Riyadh. It said it's bomb Gaza, it's an atomic bomb. And of course, all the army involved with crazy fires and minister. But as you remember in December 7, 1941, that's what America did in Pearl Harbor. They went to Japan and that's how they kind of were ended. I know it's a great idea, but do you think it's something about
you should also read, there were two other statements by Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Foreign Minister, Eli Cohen, who basically dismissed what he said and said that Israel is following the highest standard of performance of war according to international law. So we're not, again, the nuclear issue is a separate issue. But I think that again we should read very carefully. At the end of the day, the Prime Minister is the one who is responsible for engaging and leading this campaign, and this is not something that he accepts.
Toby, Susan, Edie.
So
Can you try to stand, you can stand up?
Yeah.
Thank you.
we hear a lot about UN resources and funds and schools and hospitals and all these things going into the Gaza Strip, and we hear about Qatari money going in, and I want to know, is there anything productive happening in Gaza Strip? Is there any productive industry other than making babies?
Building tunnels. No, seriously.
What do the 2 million people there do?
They try to, it's a very poor, listen, it's the people in Gaza are very poor. You know, their problem is, being led by corrupt people, by the way, the Palestinian Authority as well as Hamas. You add the numbers. You mentioned the Qatari money, you mentioned Iranian money, you mentioned tax collection, basically funds collected from taxes, and you ask, where's this money going to? And I think that the answer is very clear: military buildup, tunnels, and the pockets of the leadership of Hamas.
I was thinking more about the support for the people. I mean, the UN is just.
The UN is doing what the UN is doing, but there's a. I'm not sure that, again, they cannot recover the Gaza Strip. You need the government to actually taking care of, who actually cares about the people over there, to make the Gaza Strip a place where you can actually live in a relatively healthy and good environment. The UN is doing what the UN is doing. They provide aid. The fact that UNRWA is responsible for feeding almost most of, let's say, more than half of the population over there. I don't know if you saw the video of who was it? Razi Hamad. Razi Hamad is another senior official from Hamas. He gave an interview. It was online this week. I think that it was Russian television, Russia Today, I think was the channel. And over there, he was asked, why aren't you allowing the people in Gaza to hide inside the tunnels? The IDF is bombing Gaza, and he said the tunnels were built to protect our troops, Hamas terrorists, and not for the protection of the civilian population. The civilian population is the responsibility of, and I quote, of the UN, as he said. I worked at the UN mission for 4 years. I was the director of the UN department for 3 additional years. I know the UN system. I have a lot to say about the UN system. But this is also part of, sometimes, the international community really needs, it allows the international community to feel good. By supporting the Palestinians while actually not doing anything to really support the Palestinians. Because if you want to support the Palestinians, you need to fight Hamas. You need to actually tackle the real problems, and this is what the UN is not doing.
Susan.
So here in America, we're the biggest supporters of Israel in the world. And I'm very concerned about the enormous amount of anti-Semitism that has emerged here in this country, much less the rest of the world. So while I think it's critical that Hamas be eliminated, I'm wondering what you think about how that becomes such a backlash against Judaism and Jews around the world. Like, how long can we go on before the tide turns and there's so much pressure for us to go back? How do we the anti-Semitism?
I think that it's a question, for the history of the Jewish people, because anti-Semitism was always there and also always here. I think that what happened is that basically the masks in the last month have been actually removed, and people do not even hide their anti-Semitic sentiment. For years they used it as anti-Zionism, but today it's clear that it's anti-Semitism. It's another, maybe I'll add two more sentences. I think that the question is a question of leadership. I think that you have a clear voice coming from the American government. We have a serious problem on campus. We have a serious problem with the leadership of the universities. I'm saying that also as someone who actually worked at the consulate in the last 5 years. The things that you hear from presidents of the universities are, in best case, embarrassing. And I think that they fail to understand that they have a responsibility. They educate the future leadership of the United States, and they cannot just shy away and just avoid addressing or aggressively solving this problem. And again, I think that leadership, of course, education, but leadership at the end of the day is what we need.
Edie, Marjan, and then thank you. Okay.
There's something missing from your list. It's a threat to Israel besides Hamas that exists now. Iran and its Hezbollah are Shiites that also want to destroy Israel. They're on the northern border with rockets that can reach where Israel is. Nuclear facilities as well as this one. And last thing we can't have happen is what happened on the northern border, and the same is what happened on the Gaza border. What kind of president is going to make besides putting soldiers off there because I don't know that's what I was doing with the answer. The Shiites want to let the Sunnis handle it.
Yeah.
So the question I think is here is, what do we do about the northern border, and how does Israel prevent what happened with Hamas, God forbid, happening with Hezbollah coming into Israel?
It's a good question, and I'm not sure. The long term, I'm not sure I have an answer. But in the immediate term, right now, I think that the goal of Israel is to fight in one front and not two, and not three, and not five. And by the way, the Yemenites as well as Syria. So we're talking about 5 different fronts. So the goal is to contain right now the situation in Lebanon and focus on the main goal, which is removing Hamas. The perception is that by removing Hamas, it will actually give a serious blow to Iran, and it's basically Iran will lose one of its main assets in the region, its main proxies. So this is the immediate term. Medium term, I think that by the way, you can read about it also in the Israeli press and listen to the public discourse, as well as politicians who basically say, okay, so we had a policy that was relevant to Gaza. It's also the policy that is relevant to Lebanon. of containment, of managing this conflict. Maybe we should do the same with Lebanon. This is something that is part of the public discourse today in Israel. I know that people think about it in Israel. Right now, I think that, as I understand the situation, we have this war is exceptional because this is the first time that Israel is actually fighting in coalition. We have coalition partners. First of all, the United States, but with everything related to the remote southern front, with Yemen, for example. So even though informally, the Saudis are part of this coalition, because those who actually shoot down the Yemenite, the Houthis, missiles and UAVs are American forces in the Red Sea as well as the Saudis. Right now, as far as I understand the situation, and again, I'm not part of the government, the Americans want Israel to focus on Gaza. They don't want to expand it into a much broader regional war. And we'll have to see what happens in the day after removing Hamas.
Marjan, and then you had a question.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I guess, going back to your question or your statement about Iran, how likely is it to win this war on Hamas without really eliminating the Islamic Republic? And secondly, even if you don't want to go that far, how can the Islamic Republic be held accountable for their actions in this entire scenario? And even if you remove one tentacle, they still will have other tentacles. And how do you want to solve for this phenomenon, especially with the opportunity of a coalition?
Maybe I'll start with the coalitions. If you are in a coalition, you need to consult also with your partners. Again, it's a fluid coalition. It's not a strict coalition. It's not. There's no agreement. But of course, if Israel wants the support of the Americans, by the way, including the coalition that was created with the Americans, UK, France, and others in Europe, as well as the Arab world, we need to make sure that we listen also to their concerns as well. Right now, it's not on the agenda. I think that, you're asking Israel to remove Iran. I'm not sure that this is something that Israel can do by itself. Practically, I think that the immediate goal is remove Hamas. The question is about Lebanon and Hezbollah. You mentioned the tentacles is something that is, let's say, part of the discussion. I'm not saying that it's going to happen or it's a real possibility, but it's part of the public discourse and discourse among people, who are involved in these issues. I think that we need a much stronger and a much more aggressive international reaction to Iran, all the way to boycotts, all the way to sanctions. I think that their role was they probably didn't, it's probably true that they didn't really know the exact details about the attack. But what is clear is that you see the Iranian fingerprints all over this attack. Financing, supplying weapons, training. You had the visit of the head of the Quds Force. The Quds Force is the elite unit, the terrorist unit of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Beirut. He was there on October 7th. Every time he was in Beirut, I'm sorry, I'll put it differently. Every time we had a round of violence and a round of conflict with Hamas or the Islamic Jihad in Gaza, he was in Beirut. So he was in Beirut on October 7th. So, and I think that things are very clear today. We need to stop appeasing Iran. We need to actually deal with Iran with a very aggressive policy, sanctions, the legitimization, the fact that the Secretary General of the UN welcomed so warmly the Foreign Minister of Iran during his visit in New York, something that is beyond my ability to understand. I'm not sure that Israel can or should address this problem by itself, by herself right now.
Last public question, and then you can.
Yeah, thank you very much. There was a lot of information today, and I'm sure we're going to study it. But I see a path through here. I'm asking you all to have a call to action. You know what? Every one of us, if you haven't done it already, should call all our public officials, every one of them. And call the school board too. What are they teaching in our school? Call your colleges, have your kids, and each and every one of us in our businesses, call people that you haven't really reached out to in a long time and tell them to support Israel. And that's what every one of us can do.
The final question is to thank Mr. Nitzan.
Yes, thank you. On a geopolitical basis, Iran is the puppet master of these proxies that are attacking from many different fronts. They're in collusion with Russia. Russia's on the front with Ukraine. How do you feel this interplay of the war with Ukraine and its effect on the global scene is affecting what's happening in Israel and what we should be doing as a coalition with the whole scene?
Okay. Russia, I think that, again, masks are off. Russia is against us. I think that the statements coming from Russia, first of all, their initiative in the UN Security Council against us. Secondly, saying that Israel has no right to defend itself because we're an occupying power. It's something that Russia is not, it's clearly not a friend, not an ally. I know that there are, at least what I read this morning, there are talks about maybe a visit of Zelensky in Israel this week. I think that the Russian policy and official positions made in the last 4 weeks actually pushed us to actually accept and agree to such a visit by the Ukrainian president. I don't know if it's going to take place again, according to what I read this morning in the media, possibly this week in Israel. We have a lot to learn. We had a lot to share about Iranian technology because Iranian weapons basically kill people in Europe, in Ukraine, on European soil. And we shared a lot of information. I think that we also have a lot to learn today from the Ukrainians about the way that war is performed, especially with the threat of UAVs and drones. The first step in this attack on Israel was actually there were systems of cameras, and together with I lost the word in English. I'm sorry. The system is called, in Hebrew, it's called Yoaroa. Yoaroa is literally you see, you shoot, which is basically a camera and another machine gun connected to it, operated by troops, by soldiers, I should say female soldiers near the border. These systems were attacked by drones, by Palestinian operated drones. They dropped bombs on it and basically dismantled and neutralized their capabilities. I think that we have a lot to learn from the Ukrainians today. There's another discussion in Israel about what happened is probably, and again, I need to be very careful. Again, this is things that people say and on the media and part of the public discourse about low tech that beat high tech. We had high tech on the border, and basically the Hamas low tech managed to dismantle and to neutralize our capabilities. This is another world that we should discuss. And I think that Ukraine today, as far as I understand, Ukraine probably has the most advanced knowledge on engaging war in the Western world today compared to any other country. And I think that we have a lot to learn from them. We're on the same side today. I hope I answered the question. Thank you.
It's truly a privilege to have you here today to get inside knowledge, expansive knowledge and history of the region and your opinion, which is valued because of your diplomacy experience, your experience in the military, and your experience both in the United States and in Israel and in Egypt. And we appreciate you coming here to attend.